We take down billions of fake accounts a year.
Honestly, we had no clue y'all were going to be here.
There are plenty of bots on our service that provide a valuable function, and I wouldn't want to take that away.
We are all about the world and the culture around us. So somebody like Adolf Hitler got all this positive feedback about what was going on, and the crazier and crazier the ideas he had, he's like, let's set up death camps and murder a bunch of people and so on. Somehow he was getting positive feedback from that, and all these other people, they're all, spun each other up.
2020 seemed like the year of the perfect storm. A global pandemic combined with renewed calls for racial justice. But are there other forces at play? Do social media platforms and the average citizen unknowingly hyperpolarize communities, cities, and even countries? Who is pouring fuel on the fire? Are humans just wired for tribalism? Or perhaps there's a different way forward? In this episode of Tribe Journal, we will take a closer look at the way digital robots attack countries, how titans of social media look the other way, and how humans may be wired for polarization. The information war is closer than you might think, but perhaps so is the solution.
I saw a cover of Time magazine some years ago, and it was a big sagittal slice of the brain, and it said something like, what makes us good and evil? And there was a little spot pointing to it, and there was a picture of Gandhi, and there was a little spot that was pointing to Hitler. These Time magazine covers always make me mad because it's so goofy to think that we're going to find some spot in the brain or something. Yeah. Instead, the interesting part is, because we're live wired, we are all about the world and the culture around us. So somebody like Adolf Hitler got all this positive feedback about what was going on, and the crazier and crazier the ideas he had, he's like, let's set up death camps and murder a bunch of people and so on. Somehow he was getting positive feedback from that, and all these other people, they're all, spun each other up. And you look at anything like the Cultural Revolution in China or the Russian Revolution or things like this, where you look at these and you think, my God, how do people all behave like this? But it's easy to see groups of people spinning themselves up in particular ways where they all say, well, would I have thought this was right in a different circumstance? I don't know, but Fred thinks it's right and Steve thinks it's right. Everyone around me seems to think it's right. And so part of the maybe downside of having a live wired brain is that you can get crowds of people doing things as a group. So it's very difficult to say what it is about this person's brain or that person's brain. He obviously got feedback for what he was doing.
The COVID pandemic put humanity in solitary confinement with a smartphone, thus catalyzing a digital migration online. The combination of increased social media usage and decreased neighborly interactions created a perfect storm for bad actors to pounce. There was an election here in the United States, and things really started to heat up. Social media platforms boast hundreds of millions, and some even have billions of users across the globe. No platform has been able to avoid the coordinated efforts by nations and non-nation states to manipulate public opinion across national borders. Jack Dorsey, CEO of Twitter, explains.
There are many coordinated campaigns to manipulate the public conversation, to divide people all around the world, to confuse and generally to distract. And we do have policies and enforcement to prevent as much of this as possible. It is a growing threat, and it shows no signs of slowing down. Bots are one way that entities do this.
According to Professor Kathleen Carley and her team at Carnegie Mellon University, more than 50% of the tweets discussing reopening America may be bots. In an article published on their website on May 20th, 2020, the university explains, Carnegie Mellon University researchers since January have collected more than 200 million tweets discussing coronavirus or COVID-19. Of the top 50 influential retweeters, 82% are bots, they found. Of the top 1,000 retweeters, 62% are bots. Out of 200 million tweets discussing coronavirus or COVID-19, 41 out of 50 of the top retweeters were bots, not real people. 620 out of the top 1,000, bots. Exactly how do these digital robots manipulate and polarize individuals and communities? Professor Kathleen Carley explains.
How does social media differ from traditional media in terms of social influence? In traditional media, like newspapers, it's all about identity formation. There's well worked out ways by which newspaper articles raise an identity, like policemen, raise it up to be a symbol, and then change how people perceive it by linking it to stories about why those kind of people are good or bad. In contrast, in social media, it is not about identity formation. It's about control of communities through the creation, the manipulation of topic groups, and through the creation and manipulation of what those topic groups are talking about.
Maria Ressa is CEO of Rappler, an online news website based in the Philippines, which describes itself as fighting fake news and is a vocal critic of President of the Philippines, Rodrigo Duterte. She was eventually arrested in February of 2019 for cyber libel, although many argue that her arrest was politically motivated by the Duterte-led government. Frontline reports.
Lies laced with anger and hate spread fastest. When you only look at content, it's a whack-a-mole game. I want to figure out what the lie is, then look at the network that spreads the lies. That's the nervous system. We started looking at one account that was attacking all journalists are corrupt. One account that had 25 followers. They were all following each other. We fact-checked every single item. These were all fake accounts. We began to count and found that 26 fake accounts can influence up to 3 million other accounts. 3 million. I think the first attacks, this word prostitutes, you can even track this word. Molka Uson starts to popularize prostitutes, Thinking Pinoy picks it up. Then it's repeated 1 million times to make you distrust institutions, to shift the way you think. In May 2017, we did a story on the transcript of Trump's call with President Duterte. Rappler just made the Philippines a legitimate target of North Korean nuclear missiles. It's laughable, but people believe it. It jumped to, I can smell an arrest and possible closure of Rappler.com. Then from there, we go to sexualized attacks. Dual misogyny. Women are a favorite, easy target. Hashtag arrest Maria Ressa. It didn't trend. And that's probably why it took them another 2 years to actually arrest me. That was the end goal.
Everyone knows bad actors are pumping fuel into the fire to polarize communities in an effort to further political agendas or even take down countries. But exactly how do they use social media to manipulate people and radicalize and polarize groups against each other? Professor Carly explains.
What you see up here is an echo chamber. It's a strong echo chamber formed of a set of individuals who are all linked to each other. In Twitter, that would be their co-mentioning each other or co-retweeting. They all link into Indy, forming a much stronger signal into him that is much more influential because of the commonality of information. Within echo chambers, once an idea gets into them, it spreads like wildfire, everyone adopts it, and the emotions escalate. Indy is a super spreader. He actually can connect a lot of other individuals. Phryne is known as a super friend because she connects to and is connected to a lot of other individuals. She's also a super spreader, but the way they play roles in this system are going to be slightly different. This is the Fear of Being Known bot that formed an echo chamber. This is all bots. They started mentioning each other. That actually tricks Twitter into prioritizing them to individuals. They found a super spreader who is the imam. The imam may know nothing about this group, okay? But they start then mentioning the super spreader. That then tricks Twitter into prioritizing messages, not just from the super spreader, but any messages from that bot that also mention the super spreader to the users. Once people start then following them back because of Twitter's recommendation, they then started linking to this site, which was the benefactor agent, which was a site for a charity for money for the children of Syria, which is actually a money laundering site for ISIS. So the bot caused that change in community behavior by understanding how Twitter worked. Here's a second example. They were shaping the community narratives. In this case, there were a group of young men who are tweeting. Every now and then they had a very provocative picture of women, but they weren't necessarily a community. This bot came in there, formed its echo chamber, started finding these individuals and retweeting some of their images. Now, because they've got this echo chamber, it tricked Twitter into recommending anything they recommended. That helped all these young men find each other, so they formed a group. Then once the community was formed, What this bot did is it started then sending out messages every so on about how to militarize and where to go buy weapons. And the group became much more interested in weaponization and fighting Russia. This is, say, the alt-right. This is the evangelical South. What the bot did, they built a social influence bot, which is right in here. You can't really see it. They went out and they found a super spreader in both groups. They got the super spreader. They mentioned them a lot. That caused Twitter to prioritize them to each other. Then they mentioned a super friend in each community. That caused Twitter to prioritize not just the messages from the bot, but it caused for the evangelical South to prioritize messages coming out of the alt-right, and now the alt-right out of the evangelical South. Now, that meant that everyone in each of those groups who had different political agendas started seeing the other group's topics. And they started to see them from somebody they trusted, one of the super friends. And it created this notion that everybody in my group must be agreeing with this, so I will too. And it made those groups move together closer. And you see this all over the web. So if we actually then look at the spread of these things, this is actually showing you a bunch of different accounts. These are the ones you need to be scared of. They'll link a bunch of times to the fake URL sites, and they'll link some of the time to the real news sites, because what they do is they're trying to draw in this community that is primarily concerned with regular news, but now and then say, hey, pay attention to this little bit of interesting tidbit, which is completely fake, and so on. The main point I want you to take away is that when you're dealing with social media, the wisdom of the crowd isn't wise anymore. It's actually very manipulated, and you can actually make the crowd seem absolutely stupid. These things are changing the ratio of what topics are hot. They're making it look like you're following people you really aren't, and they're making it look like certain people are more important in your network than they are. If you want to influence American politics, you go in, you link to their super spreader, and then you can tweet out and get these things connected to almost every other topic group in the area. They're also used to direct attention to specific groups. They will build groups together. What we don't know yet for sure is how much they are being used to escalate violence, but we have seen evidence that when they do this at a national level and increase the amount of negative emotion in tweets toward a country, the number of cyber attacks on that country will increase.
If there are so many digital robots manipulating social media platforms, why don't the platforms just kick them off? In July of 2020, Mark Zuckerberg, the CEO of Facebook, fielded questions from members of the United States House of Representatives.
Can you just address the proliferation of fake accounts? I understand annually you get 6.5 billion fake accounts. 6.5 billion fake accounts. Annually you get 6.5 billion fake accounts. Are you working zealously to try to ferret out these fake accounts that are used to spread hate and disinformation?
Congressman, absolutely. We work hard on this. We take down billions of fake accounts a year.
Coming down here. We don't need this.
Okay,
We don't need y'all and we don't need them. This is a place of peace.
A lot of that is just people trying to set up accounts to spam people for commercial reasons.
Your way right now. We honestly, we had no clue y'all were gonna be here.
But this isn't just about elections. Bad actors sometimes sow conflict to spill into real life by creating events on the same day in the same location for two unknowing yet opposing communities.
We had no clue anyone else was gonna be down here.
The outrage building nationwide. In Los Angeles overnight, Black Lives Matter protesters blocked the major freeway.
A very small percent of that are nation states trying to interfere in election.
Police precincts.
We're about to lose the front of the precinct if we don't move this crowd out of the front.
Officers in riot gear tried to maintain order.
The strategy is simple. Use current events to instigate distrust and polarization among citizens in order to seed real-life conflict and to alienate the United States on the international stage.
All lives matter. All lives matter. We're out here to be divisive against you guys. We're out here because black people need to stop dying.
Yes, you're
Black
right.
people need to stop.
If black lives don't matter, all lives do not matter.
A very small percent of that are nation states trying to interfere in elections.
Clearly, interfering with elections isn't the only way social media facilitates societal decay and even self-destruction.
As a baseline proposition, do you agree that a bot does not deserve a voice on your platform, that it should be actual people and organizations?
I don't agree with that as a high level. I think we should be labeling bots so that people have greater context for what they're interacting with.
Fair enough.
There are plenty of bots on our service that provide a valuable function, and I wouldn't want to take that away.
So, as social media titans pocket billions of dollars annually with immunity under Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, they not only fail to prevent bad actors from attacking individuals and manipulating the public by sowing and instigating real-life conflict, but they continue to profit on the conflict and falsehoods themselves. Richard Stengel, former chief editor of Time magazine, served as undersecretary during the Obama administration. He was tasked with fighting Russian and ISIS disinformation campaigns and released his book, Information Wars: How We Lost the Global Battle Against Disinformation and What We Can Do About It. His book gives an insider perspective about his time at the State Department and the challenges that the United States faces in this digital war. He explains that both Russia and China are spending upwards of $1 billion annually on disinformation warfare. On October 11, 2019, Stengel shared his thoughts as a panelist on the Council on Foreign Relations.
Information warfare is asymmetric warfare, right? It's like a bunch of young people in a troll factory in St. Petersburg, which cost a relatively tiny amount of money compared to an F-35, can do more damage than an F-35. And so it's asymmetric warfare in that countries that can't afford missiles or jets or tankers or whatever can engage in it. What has also happened is the offensive weapons in disinformation war have matured and evolved faster than defensive weapons. We actually need better defensive weapons, and we need to spend more money on it. So I would argue that somebody who could figure out a system to detect deep fakes instantly would be doing a lot of good for the world. Part of the other problem of disinformation is it's not just a supply problem, it's a demand problem. People want it. Confirmation bias means we seek out information that we agree with. If you're likely to think that Hillary Clinton is running a child sex trafficking ring out of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., you're likely to believe anything and seek out information that confirms that. That's a problem, and that's a human nature problem.
In fact, on March 8, 2018, MIT News reported that on Twitter, false news travels faster than true stories. The research project found that humans, not bots, are primarily responsible for the spread of misleading information.
This work goes back to really a dramatic moment when the Boston Marathon bombings had occurred in Boston, and there was a manhunt underway after the bombings to look for the suspects.
And we are following developments out of Boston this morning, where police are searching for the second marathon bombing suspect.
I remember very clearly the lockdown, and of course MIT was involved in the incident as well, with one of the police officers being shot.
That's right. It was right here on campus.
Yeah. And I remember very well, my friends and I use Twitter and other social media platforms as one of our main sources of news, because usually they were way ahead of traditional news sources. And it was after the fact that I realized that a lot of what I was reading during that week was actually rumors, false news. And that's why I was really concerned about the effect social media is having on consumers of news.
Some of the findings of the study are: when it comes to Twitter's cascades, or unbroken retweet chains, falsehoods reach a cascade depth of about 10 to 20 times faster than the facts. And falsehoods are retweeted by unique users more broadly than true statements at every depth of cascade. One of the study's co-authors, Sarush Vasogi, explained that, quote, when we removed all of the bots in our data set, the differences between the spread of false and true news stood, end quote. Also, the spread of false stories was more pronounced for political news than for news in other categories. So, bots, digital social media robots, are influencing the algorithms and herd psychology, but humans also seem to be great contributors to the spread of false news on Twitter. What about Facebook?
Let me outline the way that we approach fighting fake news in general. There are three categories of fake news that we fight. One are basically spammers. They're economic actors like the Macedonian trolls that I think we've all heard about. Basically, folks who don't have an ideological goal, they're just trying to write the most sensational thing they can in order to get people to click on it so they can make money on ads. It's all economics. So the way to fight that is we make it so that they can't run our ads, they can't make money. We make it so that we can detect what they're doing and show it less in newsfeed so they can make less money. When they stop making money, they just go and do something else because they're economically inclined. The second category are basically state actors, right? So what we've found with Russian interference, and those people are setting up fake accounts. So for that, we need to build AI systems that can go and identify a number of their fake account networks. And just last week, we traced back the Russian activity to specific fake account network that Russia had in Russia to influence Russian culture and other Russian-speaking countries around them. And we took down a number of their fake accounts and pages, including a news organization that was sanctioned by the Russian government as a Russian state news organization.
Having fake and harmful content on our platform does not help our business. It hurts our business. People do not want to see that stuff, and they use our services less when they do. So we are aligned with people in order to take that down, and we invest billions of dollars a year in doing so.
But what happens when media companies, some which are entirely funded by wealthy governments, are able to pay Facebook and social media platforms for sponsored posts? The size of the task of self-policing and the conflict of interest is overwhelming. Nas Daily, a social media influencer and vlogger, explains how he was personally targeted by bad actors.
So they published this fake news to the Arab world only to generate hate and fear. Then they created other news channels under different names to spread the same message. And then they sponsored it. So Al Jazeera or its affiliates in another country put government money to spread fake news against an individual. And this is the proof. When I saw that sponsor thing, that's the reason I'm making this video. When I saw that, I was gonna just let it go. But when I saw sponsored, I was like, what the? I saw the video and it had like 2 million views. I was like, that is like, the average views they had was 30,000. This one had 2 million. I'm not that popular. It's their money that's so damn good that they sponsored this video to get to 2 million people. If you don't speak Arabic, you will never notice this stuff. But it's been happening for decades in the Middle East. To the people that speak English, Al Jazeera shows good news. To the people that speak Arabic, Al Jazeera shows fake news. To the English world, they say, let's remember the Holocaust and never repeat it. To the Arab world, they say, did the Holocaust really happen? To the English world, they support gay rights. To the Arab world, they suppress gay rights. It's two stories for two different audiences. And you wonder why the Middle East is full of hatred and anger. If you've ever wondered, this is part of the answer. With thousands of employees, companies like Al Jazeera can do this forever because they have unlimited money, government money that they get every year from a small Arab country. With $200 million or more, they can attack anyone or anything, including me. Media is broken.
Removing fake accounts is the other way that we can stop the spread of false information.
Not only are we looking at it, but has the industry thought about doing something like Underwriters Laboratories, which was set up when electricity was new to determine whether or not the devices were safe? Have you all thought about doing something like that so it's not Facebook alone, but the industry saying, wait a minute, this is probably misinformation, and setting up guidelines that everybody can agree are fair?
Yes, Congressman. That's actually the third category that I was going to get to next after economic spammers and state actors with fake accounts. One of the things that we're doing is working with a number of third parties so if people flag things as false news or incorrect, we run them by third-party fact checkers who are all accredited by this Poynter Institute of Journalism. There are firms of all leanings around this who do this work, and that's an important part of the effort.
My lab recently published some work on in-groups and out-groups, which is a very important part of this puzzle. So it turns out that we are engineered to care about in-groups versus out-groups. And this seems to be like a really fundamental thing. So we did this experiment in my lab where we brought people in, we stick them in the scanner, we show them on the screen 6 hands. And the computer boop, 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 goes around, randomly picks a hand, and then you see that hand get stabbed with a syringe needle. So you actually see a syringe needle enter the hand and come out. And it's really, what that does is that triggers parts of the pain matrix, this areas in your brain that are involved in feeling physical pain. Now, the interesting thing is it's not your hand that was stabbed. So what you're seeing is empathy. This is you seeing someone else's hand get stabbed. You feel like, oh God, this is awful, right? Okay. We contrast that, by the way, with somebody's hand getting poked with a Q-tip, which is, looks visually the same, but it's you don't have that same level of response. Now what we do is we label each hand with a one-word label. Christian, Jewish, Muslim, atheist, Scientologist, Hindu. And now the computer goes around, picks a hand, stabs the hand, and the question is, how much does your brain care about all the people in your outgroup versus the one label that happens to match you? Mm-hmm. And it turns out for everybody across all religions, they care much more about their in-group than their out-group. And when I say they care, what I mean is you get a bigger response from their brain. Everything's the same. It's the same hands. It's just a one-word label. You care much more about your in-group than your out-group. And I wish this weren't true, but this is how humans are. What we did next is we next have it where we say, okay, the year is 2025, and these 3 religions are now in a war against these 3 religions, and it's all randomized, right? But what you see is your thing, and you have 2 allies now against these others. And the question is, do you care more about your allies? And the answer is yes. Suddenly, people who a moment ago you didn't really care when they got stabbed, now, simply with this one word thing that they're now your allies, you care more about them. But then what I wanted to do was look at how ingrained is this, or how arbitrary is it? So we brought new participants in, and we said, here's a coin, toss the coin. If it's heads, you're an Augustinian. If it's tails, you're a Justinian. Totally made up. Okay, so they toss it, they get whatever. We give them a band that says, Augustinian on it, whatever tribe they're in now. And they get in the scanner, and they see a thing on the screen that says the Augustinians and Justinians are 2 warring tribes. Then you see a bunch of hands. Some are labeled Augustinian, some are Justinian. And now you care more about whichever team you're on than the other team, even though it's totally arbitrary, and it's arbitrary because you're the one who tossed the coin.
Yep.
So it's a state that's very easy to find ourselves in. In other words, just before walking in the door, they'd never even heard of Augustinian versus Justinian, and now their brain is representing it simply because they're told they're on this team. There are studies of this, of monkey troops on some island. What happens is they look at the way monkeys behave when they're part of this tribe and how they treat members of the other tribe of monkeys. And then what they do, I've forgotten how they do that exactly, but they end up switching a monkey so he ends up in the other troop. And very quickly they end up becoming a part of that other troop and hating and behaving badly towards their original troop.
We know society is polarized and the divide seems to be increasing amongst different communities. This isn't just about race, religion, nation, or politics. This is about humanity. Our nature is to point the finger and blame anyone but ourselves. But perhaps the government can't fight this war for us. Perhaps the social media titans can't do much about it either. Perhaps the real war, the war that has raged on for thousands of years, is a war against self-bias, falsehood, and lies. Perhaps it's time for the citizens of the world to unite for truth and accurate and unbiased understanding of the reality around us. Perhaps the real war starts within every single one of us.